gonna fall over. Huh? Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay.
Oh, really? Here now?
Oh, that's your gonna say letter
That's interesting, because I was listening to it on my over too, but I missed that.
Yeah, it was just, I was like, where did we
Testing.
Hey there.
Hey, good to see you. You doing all right? Hey, everything's good? Hello, how's it going? Hello, my friend. Well,
We're gonna go through the packet.
hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
You don't need another copy for comment. Yes, I do.
Hey, I'll let you do the
Okay.
startup and I'll go from there.
I think we're waiting for one more crew, it looks like. So we are, I just want to make sure you know what's in your packet. Did anyone that's from the media get materials? And I don't see anybody else. The first thing I gave you, or one of them, is this sheet, which is essentially just the statute from New Mexico that'll talk about assessment. And so you have that. Then you have some bulleted points that Mr. Rounds will be going through. And it gives some of the outline of the consequences that high school students could face. And this is just the graduation assessment requirements. So on it where it says 2016 cohort, that means the graduating class. So you can look to see which each class is required to have by the time they're ready to graduate. Those are the three outlines. So I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. Mr. Rounds will be giving you some information, and then, of course, we'll take questions. And let me quick give you the number of parents who have opted out at this point, if you want to take a note of that. This was as of 10 o'clock this morning, and the opt-out is a yearly requirement, so this is for this school year. We have 283 elementary parents, 168 middle school, and 9 high school parents. So that's a total of 460 as of 10 o'clock this morning. I think we'll probably still have a few more, don't you think, Mr. Han? Because they're still coming in, but that's where we are this morning. And yes, that is more than we've had in the past, considerably more. So if you want to follow up on that, we'll be probably doing another calculation before Monday. Okay, so we'll get started with Superintendent Stan Rounds.
And good afternoon. As Joe said, you have some statistics that we want you to be aware of as far as opting out of it's actually the NMSBA test. PARC is the form of test that is being given this time, okay? As I reflect back on my career, I've been a superintendent in New Mexico since 1983, and if I counted right, I've been through 7 or 8 iterations of what the state test is. You see, we've always had a standardized test in the spring in New Mexico. Well, actually, sometimes it was in the fall, I'm sorry. That was way back a long time ago. But it's our understanding that through social media that on Monday next week, there's a planned walkout and demonstration at several of our schools. And today, what I thought would be helpful is for us to talk about that situation and for me to provide some background information and then some information that's relevant to that particular issue. Let's talk a little bit about PARC first. Okay, so PARC is a new assessment, a new testing assessment that is now the New Mexico standards-based assessment. In the past, that's taken several forms, but most recently, it only hit on certain grades. Now, under the new protocol this year, it's all students in grades 3 through 11. And so that sweeps many more students into our standard testing protocol. I want to note that this is required by state statute and by then the rules that are around state statute. And we provided you as a press that particular lift. It's under NMSA 22-13-1.1M, which says this. It says, beginning with the 2010-11 school year, a student shall not receive a New Mexico Diploma of Excellence if the student has not demonstrated competence in the subject areas of mathematics, reading and language arts, writing, social studies, and science, including a section on the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of New Mexico based on a standards-based assessment or assessments or portfolio of standards-based indicators established by the department by rule. And the department is the public education department. And so we as a district are constrained to follow that requirement of law. Now, the difference in this year versus others, as I said, is first of all the scope of students that are going to be tested. The second is that this is a new test. And this is using the Park assessment and not what was, in fact, something that was form-fitted to New Mexico as NMSBA, New Mexico Standards-Based Assessment. And so this is the first time New Mexico students will have taken this particular test. And that raises concerns on our part and concerns across many in the public because it is not yet standardized. And so the only way to get that to happen is for students to take the test, then have the standards set, and then do the assessment of where students are in that process. Now, one of the things that I'd like to point out is over the next 3 weeks in this district will be this particular testing. In New Mexico, there is a block of time in March that's required and approved by the state when this test can be given. Now, there's a second test that will be given in late April and early May that is the second part of this test. The March testing involves less time than the previous standards-based assessment in these particular areas. The English language arts is a maximum of 1.5 hours for 3 sessions, which is a total of 4.5 hours of testing. And in the math, a maximum of 1.5 hours for 2 sessions, which is up to 3 hours in total time. Now, the reason we block it into 3 weeks is so that students don't start and test all day, every day, as you go through time, but instead it's scheduled in that period of time. Now, what's the significance of Park? The difference in Park versus our prior testing in New Mexico is that the Park test is aligned to something called the Common Core Standards. Now, the Common Core Standards are a set of standards instructionally that instructs and guides us as to what should be covered as relevant curriculum for our students as they progress through the educational system. And the difference is that it is now a national standard rather than a state standard. In the past, we've had state standards and benchmarks, which were the states take on what that curriculum looks like. The difference is now we have pacing guides, which guide teachers as to what the Common Core rollout should look like in their classroom. In many cases, this accelerates our curriculum. As an example, in mathematics, if you take a third grader, it is likely that it would look more like what previously had been 4th grade mathematics. So that exerts a lot of pressure and concern on people's parts. Now, the purpose of Park is threefold, and that's the difference from prior testing protocols. Because in the past, it was only this first issue that was covered, and that is to provide data to teachers to determine how well their students are doing, and then allowing teachers to take those results and make sure, as you look at pacing guides or other documents, how students are progressing through time. Now, unlike the past standards-based assessments, there are 2 other parts. And these really are the controversies and most likely part of the contributing factors to the concerns that are likely to be expressed on Monday. Unlike the past, this test is part of teacher evaluation, and it's a rather significant component of that. The park itself right now is at 35% of the total evaluation for that teacher, although there is a bill in the legislature right now that is House Bill 144 that passed the floor of the House yesterday that reduces that somewhat. The second is that the attendance and taking of this test also will add data for the school level grade that is received by the state. And so there are two factors that in the past haven't exactly been there, although the school grade it has in part. Now let's talk about the parts as parents and as adults in this, because I think there's an adult side of this and I think there's a child side of this. On the adult side, there's some anxiety. Anxiety on the part of our teachers and the anxiety on the part of many adults. I've heard a lot of contemplation about the amount of time taken for tests, the impact it has on instruction and things like that. But there's also the parent side that I think we might want to reflect on. And I would ask parents to talk to their kids as they take these tests to reassure them that they simply need to do their best. I believe in all testing situations, that's our best direction to take. Before we start the tests on Monday, I'd ask us to think about making sure our children have an opportunity to sleep well, be at school on time, and be ready for the testing environment. Now, some parents have opted out, and you heard the statistics about that just a minute ago. And just to reflect on that again, about 283 elementary parents have opted out as of about 10 o'clock this morning, 168 middle schoolers and 9 high schoolers for a total of 460. Now, that 460 is reflected against our total student population and is about 1.8% of our total student population. And when you look at our high school population, 9 students is a very, very small percentage of the total high school students. And today I want to talk more about high school now that I've laid a foundation, because I think that's where the risk and the discussion probably needs to be. Through social media, as I said earlier, we know that throughout New Mexico, not just in Las Cruces, there is a movement to consider demonstrations or walkouts as we move into the testing environment next week. And we recognize that, and we are dealing with it both from a tactical standpoint and also from a democratic standpoint. One of the things I'd like to say is students certainly have a right, and it's kind of a neat responsibility sometimes to use their democratic standards, to have a public display of their concerns, and to be able to discuss their points in public. And we certainly support that as a district. There's already been demonstrations in Santa Fe, both at the Santa Fe Public School level as well as at the Public Education Department, as I understand watching the news media. Now, my concern that I have is while there is information that is being shared, there's also a lot of misinformation that's being shared too among both students and adults. We want kids to be informed and families to be informed before they make a decision whether to refuse to take the test. And I want to break that into two parts as I talk today. We're not opposed, as I said earlier, to persons, our community voicing their opinions, having peaceful demonstrations, and talking through the issues. That's part of our process, and we certainly want to be deliberative about that. However, missing classes, missing them deliberately, and missing the test has consequences, and I want to talk about those. You see, if a student refuses to take the park test, they put themselves in jeopardy potentially. The requirement is this, as I read earlier in the statute, a student must pass the New Mexico Standards-Based Assessment to receive their high school diploma. If they don't do that, they'll receive something called a certificate of completion. My concern about that is under the current conditions in New Mexico education, a certificate of completion does not allow you to apply and enroll at the higher education level, both at junior colleges, community colleges, and in the universities in the New Mexico system. To get there, you must either have a general education diploma, a GED, or you must have a high school diploma. And those are the two doorways you must pass through. So from the superintendent's level, I need to be concerned about what might happen that would inhibit our students, who are good students, who are capable students, from making it to that diploma level. As I reflect on the requirement, the rule that we passed out to you as media says basically this: students who are graduating from this point forward must first pass the New Mexico Standards-Based Assessment, or they must pass what's called an Alternative Demonstration of Competency, an ADC, if I can use that term. But here's where some of the confusion lies. If a student doesn't attempt the NMSBA, which is the PARCC test, 3 times before and fail each of those, not pass those, they simply are not able to take the ADC. There's not an option of saying, I don't want to take the test, so I'll do an alternative demonstration of competency. Because the rule specifically states, and I confirmed it with Secretary Scandera yesterday, that they must pass through 3 attempts of the test before they would be afforded the ADC. So simply put, if you're a sophomore today and you are unable to pass the new PARCC test, the NMSBA, which is a harder test than in the past, and you demonstrate on Monday and miss the test and don't make it up in this 3-week window, you may have forfeited your right to a diploma if you're unable to pass the test in the future, because there is no relief for the ADCs. And that's a misinformation issue that is out there that I'm very concerned about. And so I want to make that point very specifically. Now, this is especially critical for older students. We're in the process of analyzing our data right now and finding students who didn't pass the NMSBA as a sophomore. And if they didn't, now as a junior or senior, if they demonstrate and not make up the test, I believe they will, and they're unable to pass the next 2 iterations of the PARCC test, I believe they will be unable to receive a diploma. And wouldn't that be sad if they were unable to go to college or to a junior college because they made that choice? So I think we want to be very aware of what might happen there. A secondary is that under New Mexico statute, and I don't have the site, I'll be happy to get it for the media, is a requirement also that a student attend classes 90% of the time. Now, we certainly hope the kids go to class often enough that they get a 90% attendance rate. However, it's not in total, it is also period by period or class by class. And I would urge us to be very thoughtful about where students might be in absences if they determine they want to demonstrate or walk out on Monday. Because a walkout will be an absence. A walkout is an absence. It's an unexcused absence unless we receive the appropriate notification from parents to excuse that absence. And that could create, in some cases, a criticality of attendance because it might dip a student below the 90% in an individual class that they might be attending. And that'd be a serious consequence. Now, it's even more serious if students determined, rather than demonstrating on the campus, that they wanted to leave campus. Because just like cutting class or just like walking out of class or whatever, as you move further away from the building, the consequences in our structure go up. And that will be the case here. You see, we're treating these absences as a standard non-excused absence basis. And so if students leave, and if they're to leave campus, then there are likely to be other consequences that will come out of that. And there's another one that we're not real sure exactly what it means, exactly how it'll codify itself. But think about this, because teacher evaluation is also part of this. We're not sure what the impact would be as students don't take the test. At least that data will not be in the teacher's data flow for their evaluation, which is 35% right now of their total evaluation package. And I'm concerned about what some of those fallouts might be inadvertently. These are inadvertent outcomes that certainly are not planned by people as they contemplate exercising their democratic rights. Now, we've spent a lot of time this week as we became aware of what's coming up, and we are prepared for this. And I want to talk just a little bit about our school preparation. In fact, this afternoon after this news conference, I'm meeting with my high school and middle school principals to make sure we are logistically aligned. What are we going to do on Monday if and when certain things happen? Because the one thing I want to assure you and the public is that we have a standard protocol we'll be following. You see, for us, this is not an emotional issue. For us, this is a tactical issue. What do you do when students do certain things, don't go to class or whatever? And so the first thing, of course, all of us want is safety. As you have a large group of students doing certain things, just like with basketball games or with class passing periods or anything else, we want to assure safety. And so I've already worked with our safety teams in every school to work at how are we going to handle particular events that could come out of mass movement of students or the outcomes of students being together. And so we certainly will be prepared for that. We believe a majority of our students will take the test. So let's think about that for a minute. A bunch of folks are taking a test and other folks are demonstrating. The two don't work real well together. And so we're going to be working at proximity issues and whatnot, because those taking the test that have selected to do that have as much right as those that decide to demonstrate. And so we'll be protecting rights on both sides. Beginning Monday, if a high school student misses the test, we're going to take an extra step. You see, we monitor every testing period, and we've prepared postcards that will be sent to parents that will notify parents if your student missed the test. It outlines briefly the consequences of that. It also outlines the makeup process for that and gives you some information about how to contact your school so that they can resolve the issue with you if that's what you desire to do. And so I appreciate those who have been working on this. Makeups will be available throughout the 3-week period. And every school site has a little different protocol, and that's why we're asking each site to be the respondent to parents who are asking questions about how that protocol goes. And lastly, our principals are ready to listen to their students' concerns. You see, schools are families, and the principals act as the parent, and local parent as they call it, in those families. And as we've met with the principals already once this week and again this afternoon, we're going to be talking about how do you outlet opportunities for students to express their concerns, to be able to exercise their democratic rights, and do it in a thoughtful and positive and appropriate way, including how we might even take those communications outside of the district and help the folks in the legislature and other places understand what concerns from parents' views are. We think that's fair, we think that's equitable, we think that's appropriate. So my final ask, we as a community are a resilient community. I'm so very proud and thankful to live here. And I think as we go through the events of next week, we as a community can take care, be understanding of each other, and work forward to be sure our children aren't hurt by exercising their democratic rights, and that our system still works. So at the end of the day, we graduate as many students as we can. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Up in Santa Fe, a few high school students took to protesting by tearing down a school gate. Are you worried about any of that happening here?
We're prepared for any event. I'm not particularly worried here. As we have worked with our high school principals, I believe we have opportunity and placement of where students might go that wouldn't raise some of the issues that might have been raised in Santa Fe. Certainly, if there was a gate torn down or destruction of property, we would treat it as if it happened on any other school day and act accordingly. Yes, ma'am.
There's obviously a lot of opposition of different concerns. One of them is that students and parents feel that teachers are forced to teach to these tests. What is the district's response?
Well, so as I said earlier, historically we've had standardized testing. I think the difference is the environment that's being created by the high stakes nature of what we're doing. What I mean by high stakes is this. We're using that to begin to grade schools. Now, we've done some of that in the past, in the previous iteration over about the last 6 years. But in the current, where the options have been really raised, is it becomes contributing to the evaluation of our teachers. And I think that's created a lot of the tension that is in this. We have had pacing guides and we have had standards and benchmarks since I've been in the business as a teacher and superintendent. And I began teaching in 1973. And I remember having to produce terminal performance objectives, TPOs. At that time, those were the words of the day to say, I know what I'm teaching, and it's in pace with what I should be teaching, and I know what the outcomes are. And quite candidly, and maybe I'm just long in the tooth, this question that's being asked today has many of the same roots. The difference was, in that day, it was between me and my principal, and today it's between me, my principal, and my evaluation, determined by the state of New Mexico, not by the school or the Las Cruces Public Schools.
And on that note, what percentage of evaluations are based on
Well, student test scores today, there are two parts of it. The PARCC test, that formalized test, is 35%. There are other indicators that are used that are also other, in many cases, tests that are another 15%, and that's in the main. There are a lot of iterations in this system. If you have younger kids, kinder 1 and 2, because it's a 3-year averaging scheme, there are nuances to that I won't go into. We'll be happy to provide you information, but it's considerably different than it has been in the past, and that, I think, is creating much of the tension, much of the concern that's occurring.
You would say, what was it again,
35 and 15. That's a total of 50%, 50. We'll come back to it. I promise, I've been looking at you. I'm sorry, I'm not missing you, but I will go here. Yes, ma'am.
You talk about the alternative degree of competency. What exactly, specifically, is going to be included in that alternative degree of competency?
Okay, it's alternative demonstration of competency. That's fine.
Demonstration of
So
competency.
the ADC, so ADCs are much like what you might consider to be finals. We call them sometimes end of course exams. In the past, we would give I remember when I taught math, and I taught calculus and algebra and geometry and trig and all that good stuff. And I always, every semester, I gave a midterm and I gave a final. The difference was then versus now, I constructed that test. Sometimes we did it departmentally, sometimes I did it on my own, and then figured in as part of the student grade. The difference now is that we have a common test prescribed and approved by the state of New Mexico.
Okay, so it'll be on the students' finals and midterm exams?
And they're approved finals, and it'll be finals. The end of course exam is the exam at the end of the course that they take. And the difference is that it has to be approved by the state of New Mexico to be approved for the purpose of contributing to the diploma question.
Now, if a student was to sit at the test and just sign their name and just sit down, not complete any portion of the test, and they were to score a 0 on this, and because you said they had to at least attempt the test 3 times, would that make them qualify for the ATC?
The answer is probably, I can't give you if they answered one question, my answer would be yes. I don't know, I have not received direction from the state about exactly what you've given, and I don't want to give misinformation.
Right, yeah, I was just curious, what would be considered
Attendance is important, and I believe answering something on the test is the rest of that supposition would be my hunch. Okay, yes.
Two questions. One is, I heard some things, and questioning whether because this is a computerized test, whether the district's computers are up for the testing. Can you speak to that?
I'll be happy to speak with that, and I guess I'll say I hope it doesn't snow. I'm kidding. So what we did, and there's a lot of controversy in town, that's why I'm joking about it. So there was an event, 2 events that we've held in the district to attempt to try whether or not the computers will all run appropriately for this test. And we've done it twice. We tried to do it on that day that I just mentioned statewide, because it's not only an issue of does your system work in district, but as it articulates to other servers and whatnot, does that put too much load or capacity into the infrastructure that's there? Except for some minor problems, like a Java update that happened the day before we tried it, and in fact may happen right before Monday, a Java update, a software update, it creates the question you're asking, will it work? Will it work on time? Will it work appropriately? From a hardware standpoint, we feel like we're good. The district has invested quite a bit of money in getting the right computers, the right pipe, the right server connections and things to make it work. I guess we'll know more Monday evening after we move through this. I feel optimistic we'll be fine. And we've also, over time, worked with students so they have an understanding of how that might look and how that might be part of an environment they're in by working with kids so they have simulations for the last year or so that it's not new to them, that kind of thing.
The other thing that I got some input, I was talking to somebody who's a current educator,
Mm-hmm.
who had a chance to kind of look at the park test and all that. And this educator predicted that, with the exception of probably the most brilliant advanced placement student, every student will probably flush. If something like that happened, what would the district do in response?
So let me go to the issue of norming just for a minute, because that's a very pertinent question. This is a hard test. It was given to a group of legislators in Hobbs, New Mexico at a legislative education study committee meeting, and what they gave them was the 5th grade test. And a majority of them were unable to complete it. So it's hard. It is hard. However, let's talk about norming. While there are cut scores currently in our rules that are provided to us, those are going to be calculated based on a standard distribution, as I understand it. And there is a compartmentalization of students' abilities, which should, and until they've done the work, I can't give you any guarantees, ameliorate the question you're asking. Will all students fail? I don't believe that'll be the case because of that norming that has yet happened. And so I'll have to defer that to the future for you. Yes, ma'am.
Now, if a student does walk out on Monday, they will be given the opportunity to make up that exam, and they'll still be able to graduate?
So let me walk through if you walked out on Monday as a student one more time. So you walk out, if it's peaceful, it's using your democratic rights, we support that. That's fine. Here's the deal. It can't interrupt testing that's happening, and you must make it up during this time period. And we'll accommodate you, and we're going to let your parents know you're out. Because I was a parent. I still am. They're just old. I've got grandkids now, and as a parent, I'm going to tell you, my kids didn't always tell me what they were doing. And they did things like that. So we want parents to know, just like we know, what's going on. And so that's why we're sending postcards. And they will let parents know, your child was gone. Parents, if you approve that, great. And now we'll, on that card, also give you the information about how can they make the test up, and then a reminder of what I said earlier, there are some risks, and if you don't take it up, we would like to talk with you about those risks.
And that was the next thing I would get to, so there won't be an outreach. Because, yeah, say you're a young person and you're not even thinking about the consequence, you just want to participate in it.
Yep.
Then it's a, in addition to reaching out to the parents, as they're going against counsel or counselors, if this is putting them at risk of not graduating?
So let me go there. Our high school counselors spend a goodly amount of time working with students on their graduation planning and working on their next step planning into college or the workforce or wherever. We'll continue those efforts, and we've always been very candid with students about where they are and the trajectory that they're on. It's possible you could walk out on Monday, not take the portion of the test, and relinquish one of your 3 opportunities that you have to have in place before the ADC, and the next year pass the test. No harm, no foul. Now, my worry from an administrative standpoint is what if you're the student who has difficulty on the PARCC test, and once it's normed, you can't pass it? That single display of your democratic options, if you don't make up the test, could become problematic because you could not be allowed to take your ADC, not have that safety parachute, and therefore I'll be unable to provide your diploma to you. And that one hurts me because I give a lot of diplomas every year and I don't want to see that number go south. Yes, ma'am.
Now, have you talked to Las Cruces Police at all in case students do leave campus and they do venture out farther than the security is able to protect them?
You know, one of the neat things about Las Cruces is we're a little big town. And so the chief and I have often options to talk to each other, and we will continue those dialogues as we move toward Monday. So absolutely. The good news in Las Cruces is all of the responsible adult agencies really do work together. And we thank fire, emergency, police, and the other institutions for their collaboration and cooperation. We'll do that in this case too. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. So also note that on all of our high school and middle school campuses, we have school resource officers that are part of either the Las Cruces Police Department or the Village of Mesilla. I don't believe we have any sheriff SOs, no. And so we do collaborate with agencies, and they'll be right at each of those, and we've had and will continue to have strategic planning with them, as we always do, as we move forward with kids. Other questions? Yes?
Could a walkout negatively affect teachers, the school, and the district?
Yes, under certain circumstances. So let's go there for a minute. As I said earlier, teacher evaluation, I'm not sure what a student walkout would cause in terms of the 35% question you asked earlier. Not knowing who's going to walk out and what their scoring might be, it certainly would give an alienated picture or a different picture than if everybody were there. It would change that. To the dynamic that creates, I have no idea. That could be a risk. I'm not throwing a flag on that one because I'm not sure statistically at 2% of the population it will be, but that could have an effect. The grade for the school could go down in 2 ways. If we didn't meet our 95% attendance threshold because of this walkout, that could create the letter grade for the school to fall 1 full letter grade. And that could have ramifications on certain staff evaluations. So those are 2 of the issues that come to mind. Yes.
If parents opt their children out of testing, will they just automatically be able to complete the ADC, or is that a different process?
So the opt-out has a different process, and as we deal with parents in that regard, we would like to have the opportunity to talk with parents who opt out. Of those that have so far opted out, we've conferred with each of them, is my understanding. Mr. Hands back there, Tim and his staff have done I think, a yeoman's job to reach out, along with the staff out of the whole instruction division, to help parents understand all the intricacies of what this is and to counsel them as they make a decision. And again, I want to say this, we respect decisions of parents and decisions of children, but we want to be sure we understand exactly what the facts are and have information and not disinformation in the process.
There's been a lot of talk about the required 90% attendance rate.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into more detail about the consequences of not meeting that?
Sure. So for a student to receive credit in a particular class, they must attend that class 90% of the time. A scenario that I was talking about is a student who might, at the end of the year, be close to that 90%, and because they take an unexcused absence for this demonstration or future ones, we would urge them to be very aware of what their attendance position is, whether or not you have unexcused absences. That's only 9 in a year in that class. And so first period classes historically have been one of our more underattended. First and last periods are. And so I know of a number of students that are on the pinnacle of the tipping point of that. And an additional day might not be good news for them. So we just want to be careful.
Also, we've talked a little bit about the consequences of leaving campus, that protesting would be allowed on campus, peaceful demonstrations. But in my earlier reporting, I was told that there would be more severe consequences for students who left campus. What might those include?
So if students leave campus, that becomes a different level of disciplinary intervention. It's more than cutting a class, it's actually leaving that educational setting. And so it could be suspensions, it could be other actions, and because we have what's called a progressive discipline model, it depends on what else students are carrying in their discipline jacket at their school. And so I don't want to hazard guesses as to what individuals might have happened, but I would assure you it would be another point of disciplinary regression, if I can use that term, for any student doing that.
But it could vary from student to student.
It could vary from student to student, and in the most extreme case, a student on the tipping point could even lead to a very significant action to them. I don't anticipate many of those.
I've got one
You bet.
What is your feeling about why there is so much emotion around this issue? From the students, particularly, but also the parents as well.
I think in my opinion, students often reflect our adult attitudes as we talk at the dinner table and in classrooms and other places that we share. I think the biggest frustration here is the high-stakes nature of the testing. I think there's also, and we've had this discussion for the last several years, as we've tried to deal with how we reduce the impact of testing, there is certainly a plethora of testing that's occurring. And in the spring, it's my personal opinion, we need to learn to manage that better and reduce the number of days and hours of impact we have on what goes on in the classroom. However, in this particular case, compared to the old NMSBA, I'm pleased to see that there's a slight reduction in time that this is going to produce. This isn't the whole testing story. There's a lot of other parts to this. But why is this one volatile? Because I believe it's high stakes. And I think it's high stakes to teachers is the first, most prominent reason it's becoming a concern. And I think the rest is that we sort of have testing overload in our sites in many places, and I think there's a reaction to that. And so I think as we have our adult angst and concerns, students also do that. They're reflective of what we are.
Any other meeting questions?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, we've put you off for a long time. Okay, Mr. Castillo, what's your question? What school are you at? Camino, thank you. Yes, sir. So we would ask parents to come here, to go to our accountability and assessment unit, Mr. Hand's unit. We have an opt-out form and some information we would like to provide to the parent. And the parent then can make the decision, I would hope with a student of your age, certainly, as you make a collective decision about what to do about that. And then that opt-out form can be signed and delivered to us at that point. And I want to say, Mr. Castillo, that I appreciate your honesty and concern about that. And I do advocate for reason. I think we're walking a tightrope between accountability and overload. And I think there's a lot of work we all have to do as we kind of work through time to figure out how to do both. And I have an opportunity at both national and state levels to voice that. I do advocate for you and others. I'm not sure that's always understood by some as we try to move toward best practice, best ways of doing business. What I really want to have happen is I want to hand you your diploma as you go into your next step in life so you can be successful. That's my job. Thank you. Anything else? Because we put you off forever. Okay, good.
There's one from another student.
Yes.
Name and where you go to school.
Castellano? Okay, from Centennial. Thank you.
What happens if the student is advanced and has already passed the MSBA?
That's a great question, and my goodness, I'm so proud of people who are in that position. The reality is for those folks, because you have already passed in MSBA, is all this discussion about whether or not you'd qualify for ADC is moot. You've completed that part of the requirement for your Diploma of Excellence. You check that box off. And so you have little risk in this particular event as long as you do it peacefully, appropriately, which you will, and we go from there. So that's the good news on this story also. Thank you. What else? Let me go back. I didn't hear it. Gave a note. So let me go up about 10 feet above that or 100 feet above that. If a student is absent from school for any reason, a parent has a right to provide a note for an excused absence several of those times. This is no different. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
Are we done? And there's one more parent.
Yes.
Use your name, please.
All three levels.
Great.
Most interested
Mm-hmm.
She, at the young she's a sophomore, so she didn't take the MSBA freshman,
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand, last year. She has taken her PSAT, done well on it. She's in pre-calculus, honors classes, and is not in a technically language arts class right now,
Mhm.
because she's waiting for classes,
Mhm.
for junior and senior.
Mhm.
She's creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
She's not taking the test because none of whose responsibility is it for me to go in and say, I had to pull my kid out and put her with someone she doesn't know in class to take the test? Or is it the teacher or the principal's responsibility to find those students who kind of fit in that mold, to test them?
It's our responsibility. And I'm going to ask afterwards for you and I to meet so we can be sure we close that loop. That shouldn't happen.
Well, so, considering the elementary schools and the amount of time that is
So let me answer, first of all, the failure part, I can't assure you is the issue since we haven't normed. So let me say that. You're asking the issue that I think is burning pretty brightly right now. And I think it's the debate that we certainly deserve having with each other. We're walking a tightrope, in my opinion. I became a superintendent in 1983. That's when I started doing the business of superintending. And that year there was a work that came out that was called A Nation at Risk. And in that, there was a statement that is emblazoned in my mind about what was referred to as a rising tide of mediocrity in American education. And it began a rally that assumed that public schools don't do their job. And since then, I've seen us continue as a nation, because this is where this started, is at No Child Left Behind, which came out of that movement, to assure that we are doing the competent and highly rigorous efforts of education for our children to prepare them for the future. I'm convinced we're not exactly aligned where we need to be with that, to some of the points you're raising. I think it doesn't hurt us to raise our rigor, but where is the right rally point for that?
Are giving themselves 3 to 5 years before they make this test accountable, or make the students accountable. Why has New Mexico not given themselves this? Why is it this first year, we are responsible, our children are responsible for their test scores, and the teachers are responsible for their test scores?
And this needs to be our last question.
Okay, go ahead.
And others have, other states have given themselves, well, if our standards are not quite where the testing standards are, let's give ourselves some time to meet in the middle. Why isn't New Mexico doing that?
So, two parts of that answer. And New Mexico education runs through 3 different streams. One is New Mexico's statute, which doesn't directly push to the question you asked yet. The second is what's called New Mexico Administrative Code, which also doesn't address that directly, but tells me what I have to do in both performing the law, what is under New Mexico Administrative Code, and what's given to me as rule, which is the third part. The questions you're asking are in rule. Now, that's perpetuated by the Public Education Department out of the Office of the Secretary of Education. Now, to the answer to your question, there is legislation before the legislature that would go to the statute level and clarify that for the PARCC test, as it applies to teacher evaluation and perhaps to graduation, that would make this year, the 2015 cohort, the first year of a 3-year strategy, like you mentioned. I support that legislation. I supported the legislation through my association, the New Mexico Superintendents Association, and another one called the New Mexico Coalition of Education Leaders, which includes principals, counselors, business officers, and others. And so we're asking that question today. The downside of doing that legislation is that we would still need to run the old NMSBA. So if you're balancing the time commitment for testing for that interim period, you would actually see an increase in testing, but a decrease in exposure because of the new test. And that's what we're wrestling with from a public policy standpoint. I'm very clear on my position where I am. This won't be a surprise to anybody, including the Secretary of Education, the governor, our legislative contingent, or others, because I've testified on it. And I think it's to the point you're raising. That's part of that democratic process that we're talking about. See, not only do you get to even do a walkout and demonstrate, but then there's that political process of making laws that I'm part of also. And so you ask about the advocacy question. I think that's an example of an advocacy move that I'm taking personally, that we as a district are taking, that our board passed a resolution supporting that as part of that process. But the issue is that supervents the rule, which is the lowest level of requirement, but the administrative code tells me as superintendent, my principals and whatnot, that we must follow the rule established by. And there were 2 court cases that occurred this last year that questioned that, and in both cases, both at the district court level and the appeals level, they upheld the secretary's right to make the rules. In fact, in exactly this area. So now the other politics are what we will do to determine what public policy is. I want to say the last comment. I understand the frustrations. My goodness, I get frustrated sometimes too. At the end of the day, the measure that I look at, that I hope all of us look at, are our children. At the end of the day, that's what I said to you, sir. I want to hand you your diploma. I want to congratulate you and have you highly achieve into your life. That's my job. That's the job of this district. And I hope through all of the other foray that we have, that we never lose sight of that. The issue of the excellence that you have, young lady, that you talked about. You're well ahead, you see. And that's magnificent. And all of this, we tend to miss that sometimes. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of our students. And so we continue to hope to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And those of you who haven't talked to the school principals of the high schools know that you may be coming on Monday if you choose to do that. And you're all free to do that. But not going to school would be awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.